Hello, everybody. Just a quick word from editing Gavin here. This episode, I tried to do something different with my microphone setup, and it made me very muffled. Fortunately, this is a FIA episode, and I'm not doing the bulk of the talking, so hopefully it does not detract too much from your enjoyment of the episode. But anyway, I think it's a really good one, and hopefully you'll think so too. So here's the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 90 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. That is Fia. Mike is prepping for the first day of school. His big
Aw.
first day back. So he will be with us again. Hopefully next week. I think it'll depend on how the start of the school year is. I also work at a university, so I know how stressful the first week is. Uh, well, I work in a place of education. So yeah, the
A
first week
place of
is
education.
yeah is definitely
An
the first
adjustment.
struggle. Yeah, especially after the
Yeah,
summer he had, I'm sure.
right.
But
Well,
t- today is an episode that ends in zero, which means that it's a Fia episode.
yes, it is.
And so Fia teased it as we are starting the somewhat recent tradition of doing. She teased it last episode what we're talking about. So what exactly are we talking about today? And then we'll get into some of the more housekeeping things.
So today we're going to be talking about something that I saw in the news last week. The John Charles, and I'm going to butcher this the whole time because there's multiple pronunciations of how you can say this, but an island and a state recognized indigenous tribe, um, and a little bit of their story and how they made the news last week.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if hopefully you all are looking forward to hearing more about that. I know I am, but a little bit of housekeeping things. Firstly, don't forget to follow the podcast on our various Twitter, our Facebook, and YouTube, and give us feedback about the show, any future topics that you'd like to hear about on the podcast. If you would like to be a guest on the show, we have forms for that, as well as to suggest topics down below in the show notes, as well as it is a massive help to the podcast to rate the podcast on whatever platform you use, or if you listen to us on YouTube, making sure to click the thumbs up button and make sure that you're subscribed. All that stuff is immensely helpful to the podcast and just letting us know how we're doing, as well as helping the podcast grow and doing all those things, as well as if you have some paleontology curious friends as well, maybe send the podcast their way. It'd be a big help to all of us.
Yes. Please like this episode specifically because
Yes,
it's Fia Takes the Wheel, part three.
yes, exactly. Next week we are talking about Antarctica, the whole continent, the whole thing,
Great.
the
Love
the
it.
history, the geology, the fossils. Um, and so we're going to be going over the literal coolest continent in great detail next week. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. And so normally we transition now into a swamp corner with Fia, but since this entire episode is a long extended swamp corner, I just want to touch on an interesting sort of recent paleontology discovery in the last week or so. So there are a handful of they're called in a lot of pieces of media dinosaur mummies,
Hmm.
which isn't
What is that?
really true. They're just very good specimens that usually preserve like a lot of skin, not just skin impressions. We have skin impressions for a lot of dinosaurs. We don't have like the actual skin
Okay.
itself. And in some cases of these dinosaur mummies, we even have, recognizable organs. If you like CT scan it, you can see, okay, here is exactly where the lungs were. Here's exactly where the stomach was and how big it was and stuff like that. And so there are a handful of these. They're obviously extremely rare. But the most famous are mostly ankylosaurs, which, if you're not familiar, are the big sort of armored tank, club-tailed sometimes dinosaurs. and that's because a lot of their skin is just bone. It's a lot easier to preserve skin that's got some bone in it, just because bone preserves
Right.
it well. Um,
Yeah.
However, just in the past week, it has been published that a hadrosaur, which is a duck-billed dinosaur, found up in Canada, that was one of these quote-unquote dinosaur mummies, and this was the first of its kind. Um, like I said, these were uh, generally some of the bigger non-sauropod dinosaurs around. So this would be something give or take the size of a an elephant or so. And so
Cool.
discovered up in Alberta, and in it was in this wonderful place called Dinosaur Provincial Park. It is Canada has a much more robust version of what would be like our state parks.
Hmm.
This
Really?
Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta is extremely famous for its dinosaurs, which is where it gets its name. And yeah, so it was found just in the past week, just sort of poking out of the rocks as fossils are wont to do. And yeah, it's interesting. The full thing hasn't been fully prepped and published yet, so I'll be very excited to see it when it does. Um, but yeah, so if you want to look more about it, we'll have down in the show notes an article from the Canadian Broadcasting Service, basically the um, BBC of Canada.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for sharing that, Kevin.
No problem. So, Fia, tell me more about this island.
All right. So I'll just say it one more time. The Ile de Jean Charles.
Would you like
Uh,
me to pronounce it in French?
yes, because there is a French version and there is uh, other versions. So go ahead, please pronounce the
Right.
French
And
version.
so I want to preface this by saying I do not speak Louisiana French, which is very different. So
Yeah.
I would pronounce this Ile de Jean Charles.
Yes. Very nice. And we have some other pronunciations of like this pirate guy Jean Lafitte that like is also spelt the way Jean is spelt in
Hmm.
this island. But I my boyfriend and I were trying to do some research on YouTube through like all of these documentaries and stuff that would talk about this island, and some people would pronounce it like Jean, some people would say Jane, some people would say
Hmm.
John. So a mix of things. But anyways, this this island is in Terrebonne Parish, which if you don't know what a parish is, it's basically like a county. But in Louisiana, we have parishes.
Right.
Terrebonne Parish is where I used to live before I moved to go to school at LSU, and the parish is also where I do all of my research on the oyster reef. So within this parish, there's this island, but there's so many. When you look at it on a map, there's so many like pockets of marshland surrounding it that it doesn't really look like an island. It just kind of looks like this patchy framework of like spotted polka dot land. For over 170 years, this island has been a homeland and burial grounds to the state recognized, but not federally recognized, which is important later, Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe. This tribe was originated on the island and came about through the Awful Act signed in the 1830s. Do you have any guesses about what this act was?
I sure do. So also just for a little bit of background, so my wife is a card-carrying member of the Choctaw Nation.
Oh, wow.
She yeah, she is not from this, group of Choctaw, but obviously,
Right.
back before, you know, European colonizers came over and displaced everybody, most of these
Yes.
nations were pretty widespread. And so there's
Yeah.
different subgroups, similar to how we would say, we're all American here in the United States, but I'm from New York. Fia
Yeah.
lives in Louisiana now. Just different sub areas of the same uh, nation. And obviously the different, Native American nations organize themselves different ways. I don't know all the logistics of it, but
Right.
I know she's not from this particular, group of Choctaw, which is
Yeah.
interesting. So hopefully, because Liz also did not know the topic of this, so that we're talking about today. So it'll be interesting to see. how she
Right.
thinks of this. But
Yeah.
anywho, uh,
Uh,
1830s Native American stuff. That sounds like some Andrew Jackson nonsense.
yes. Yes. Unfortunately, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, which basically forced Native people to move west of the Mississippi River. And spoiler, the island that we're talking about is west of the Mississippi. This act led to numerous tribes being forced to relocate, also known as the Trail of Tears, and is a terribly, I find, embarrassing thing of our history that we, as Americans, did to the Native American people. But,
Yeah. But luckily, we also have, a U.S. history teacher as one of the hosts on this
yeah,
podcast.
right,
So, I know for sure that at least Mike does a good job of teaching this kind of thing um, to his students because it's really, especially, I liked my U.S. history teachers, but I don't think they fully were like, hey,
yeah,
America genocided an entire continent of people,
right,
and that didn't really sink in.
yeah, yeah. It definitely didn't sink in for me until like I was like in college. Then
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is genuinely terrible. Anyway, back to uh, the episode topic. One particular tribe, the Choctaw tribe of the Mississippi, was forced to leave their land and travel by foot with little food and supplies, made their way west. And some of the Choctaw Native Americans fled to the wilderness of the swamps in South Terrebonne. There, they also found other refuge from the Biloxi and Chiptamacha tribes, and probably some other tribes as well along the way. It kind of, from the research that
Mhm.
I did, my understanding is that it was like this melting pot of a bunch of people of different tribes being displaced and
Right.
just trying to find somewhere to go. And so they started settling on the island, and thus they became this combo tribe of Biloxi, Chitamacha, Choctaw tribe.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, by the 1900s, they had 77 families living there, and it was flourishing. People on the islands were mostly self sustaining with fishing, oyster farming. Oyster are a huge thing in Terrebonne Parish, and so it makes sense that they were using what they could on off the land to, keep themselves alive.
Yeah.
The reason that I wanted to talk about this island and the tribe that lived there is because of the current issues the island and the tribe are facing right now. The people living on the island are facing the threats of coastal erosion. And when I say facing the threats, I mean they're happening right now. They've lost already so much land. It's not this 50-year future prediction. Like, we know that Louisiana loses about 16 square miles every year. This
Which
island was over.
that
Oh,
number is just insane to
right,
think
right.
about.
Oh, I was trying to find like some like area of land to compare it to, and Wikipedia said Manhattan, but like I don't know if that's really
That was
true.
the first thing that came to my mind, and that's what I just Googled. So the area of
Right.
Manhattan is a little over 20 square miles.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
give or take a Manhattan,
Yeah.
well, more
Every year.
more more realistically, take a
Yeah.
Manhattan every year from Louisiana.
Right.
That's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah.
And
And so,
that's only going to get worse. That's going to be the case on pretty much every state that's got a coastline, and
right.
particularly since we're talking vaguely about climate change, there's a lot of, as I'm sure we're going to talk about, like island nations. You
Right.
know, the
Exactly.
first ones that come to my mind are like in like the South Pacific, where it's like the
Yeah.
highest elevation on these islands is like maybe 20, 30 feet.
Exactly. Yep.
So, yikes.
Yeah. And so the island was over 5 miles wide and 11 miles long in the 1950s. But as of today, it is now a fourth of a mile wide and 2 miles long due to subsidence and the subsidence caused by a multiple factor problem.
Hmm.
Subsidence. Oh shoot, sorry.
There you go.
I
No,
can't.
that's okay. I was.
I know it's subsidence.
That's okay.
Gavin,
So,
can you please give me a recap of subsidence?
of course I can. So,
Thank
subsidence
you.
is the general term for parts of the earth sinking. Um, so, for example, that happens quite a lot when heavy things get dumped on certain areas of the earth. Uh, a good example is uh, I'll circle back to what's happening in Louisiana because we kind of messed that up. But in the northeastern and generally northern parts of North America, when the glaciers would come through in the ice age, that's a lot of weight. Even at the southern end of the glaciers, like up in New York where we're from, there'd be like a mile of ice, like solid ice above the ground, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of weight. So just that sheer weight puts some strain on the Earth's crust and causes it to sink. That's kind of an extreme example because you're talking about hundreds of cubic miles of ice in that scenario, but it also happens on a much smaller scale in places like southern Louisiana. So in this
Yeah.
case, it would be all of the sediment, the silt and sand and stuff that the Mississippi River dumps down in Louisiana. It picks it up all throughout its drainage basin up through the rest of North America and
Mhm.
dumps it down into the Gulf of Mexico. Normally, all of that silt would just flow out into the Gulf, and all of that weight from all that extra sediment would on a much smaller scale than the glaciers, but caused the crust to sort of sink a little bit in these areas. Normally, that wouldn't be as much of a big deal because the sediment coming in would just replace that
Mhm.
small amount of like sinkage.
Mhm.
However, the Mississippi no longer wants to flow where we are making it flow, so the sediment ends up in the wrong places. So the sinking is continuing, but it's not being rebuilt by new sediment coming in from the river.
Right. And this is because humans have dammed up and leveed up the Mississippi to allow it to flow where they want it to flow
Right.
in order to protect from flooding events in major areas like New Orleans.
Which, to be fair, floods are
Right.
dangerous. Floods are bad. Um,
Yeah.
but having a river go against sort of its natural flow is not sustainable for very long.
Right. So, on top of that, we also have hurricanes, some really intense hurricanes that have happened,
Hmm.
like Katrina in '05 and Ida in 2021, about a year ago from today. These intense storm events, along with the subsidence that's happening and flooding in areas that weren't necessarily historically being flooded, caused contributing to the land lost on the island. And in addition to that, you have rising sea levels, and then the dams and levees were built so that the island was not included in the protection of those systems. And so there, this island day, John Charles, is left kind of bare to these intense storms and just has to weather them out.
So it was like just purposefully excluded from all of these sort of protection
I'm
measures.
not sure if it was purposely. Yes, it was purposely excluded. Whether or not it was spiteful or just unrealistic, I'm not sure
Okay.
about that. Yeah,
Okay.
but yes, they were purposely left outside of the levee protection. And then finally, on top of that, you have dredging of canals for shipping and oil pipelines, which all of these things have contributed to the degradation of the island. And so, in the early 2000s, only 25 families remained on the island. Most of them had already relocated, and the chief of the tribe began to try to relocate the entire community as a whole in efforts to save their culture and traditions.
Okay.
Naturally, the majority of the people, they didn't want to relocate. Well, I can't really speak for them, but in situations that I've seen, people don't really want to leave their home because they've built on it and they've grown accustomed to it and they take pride in it.
Right.
There's resistance from the people for leaving, and there was also some hesitation that some residents felt that the government wanted the residents to relocate so that the oil industry could have free range over the area, or even uh, fishing areas without any political conflict.
And just historically, yeah, that
Yeah,
seems like some stuff that,
it's yes, it's like a pattern,
yeah, you know,
right?
and depending on, I don't know who would get like the water usage rights or whatever to like
Yeah,
explore for oil, whether it be like the state or the federal government. Either way, it wouldn't be out of character.
yeah, agreed. So the island is degrading. The tribe wants to relocate, and in 2016, Louisiana, the state, got money from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to fund the tribe's resettlement to safer grounds. This was a $48 million grant as part of the National Disaster Resilience Competition. And so this department billed the project, quote, the relocation of Isle de Jean Charles Band of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe to a resilient and historically contextual community. And so this resettlement project was adopted by the state.
Okay.
But the reason why they had to have the state get involved is because the tribe lacks federal recognition as a tribe, and so they couldn't apply for the grant on their own and had to partner with the state.
Gotcha.
And
Interesting.
unfortunately, this caused a lot of conflict with the tribe and the state because the original application, as I read you the title, the main
Hmm.
goal of the resettlement of the tribe uh, was to resettle, take basically move their whole community to a different place. And in this process, the tribe had created an intricate plan of resettlement and sustainability by, designing how their parks would be set up, how land would be used for like farming and agriculture, how there'd be a worship area, and basically building a microcosm of a reservation that the people would get to build from this money. However, after the state received the money, they took a more broad approach to the grant and started making decisions for resettlement for everyone that lived on the island. So there are
Gotcha.
people that also
Yeah.
lived on the island that were not part of the tribe.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't realize that there were other people on the island.
Right, yeah. I guess I didn't mention that before, but there was a tribe, but there were also other people living on the island as
Okay.
well.
So this money was supposed to be specifically for the tribe, but the
Correct.
state was like, no, we're going to use it for everybody. Is
Yes.
that
And
okay?
yeah, right. And this was supposed to be like a really big deal, this grant that they got, because it would serve as sort of a prototype for handling what the United Nations expects will be the displacement of up to 200 million people over the next 30 years
Right.
by global warming, climate change, and sea level rise. And so the state sort of abandoned the tribe's vision of resettlement and removed the tribe's chief and council out of the decision making. They gave conflicting reasons for the changes or failed to communicate to the tribal leaders, and just really being a little crummy, like
Yeah.
being a little
And
crummy.
anytime you remove people who live in an area from making decisions about that area. That's just
Right.
generally not good. But
Yeah.
the whole extra layer of this is what various governments, whether it's state government, local governments, or the federal government, have done to Native American communities since America was founded. Uh, Not a
Yeah.
good look to be happening
Yeah.
in. So
Yeah.
when was all of this happening? I know you said that the Louisiana got the money in 2016, but was all of this stuff happening more recently?
No, this was in the timeline of 2016 to 2018. So
Okay.
they abandoned the tribe's vision of resettlement. They cut people out of communication, and to make it worse, by 2018, the resettlement area known as, they called it the New Isle, was still mostly empty lots. More than, oh, I guess this was 6 years after. Sorry,
Well,
six
that
years
just makes
after.
it worse.
Yeah, 6 years after the grant was awarded, only 12 homes had been established in the site of land that they purchased and were complete. And so, if that 6 years, I guess that brings us to 22. So, this is right now. They basically asked the state basically asked the federal government to invest in tribal communities, and it worked, and then removed them in all aspects of the resettlement, and even removed the mention of the tribe in official descriptions of the project. Going back a little bit, in 2018, the tribal leader asked the housing department, the federal department, to take the
Housing and
grant
urban
back.
development.
Yes, housing and urban development. Thank you. um, the chief asked them to take the grant back. He was so offended and disrespected that he told the federal government that they should take it back. The federal
I
government
mean,
ignored
yeah,
that.
I don't blame him. But
Yeah,
you
exactly.
said the federal government just was like, no,
Yeah, they were like, no. And
that's
they
crazy.
just continued on. So, yep, after that, in 2018, they purchased a 515-acre sugar farm uh, for about 12 million. The hope for the plan is to have about 110 houses, a community center, a commercial and retail space in this purchased land. 37 houses are planned for residents who lived on the island after 2012, and then another 25 empty lots could be given to residents who left before 2012. About 50 lots may eventually be offered to other coastal residents. That's pretty much all they got today. Is that and why this made news is because they were, I believe, in the upcoming weeks, we're going to, the state government was going to host like this celebration of the opening of this these new 12 homes, and it got some controversial and nasty publicity and some articles written about all of this stuff that happened in the background of what's really going
Hmm.
on in this stuff. And like, I found this really interesting to me because this acre of land is in Homa, where I used to live.
Okay. But yeah, I
Right.
definitely get why people would be mad that they were throwing a celebration. It's like we gave you $48 million 6 years ago, and you built
Exactly.
12 houses
Right.
that might not even be going to the people who it was supposed to be going to. I definitely get why people would be mad about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. What bothers me the most about this situation is that they wrote the grant like specifically to help this tribe. And I know how grants, like how you
Right.
write a grant and how you get funding for things. You give this detailed plan about why, like, I can imagine they would be like, why these people are important, why they need to be relocated, how historically and culturally important this community is. And they spun that in a way to get funding, and now are kind of regressing. And that's like just kind of
Yeah.
disappointing in my eyes.
So I'm curious, I guess just on a little bit of like a meta level, was there like a change in like administration in Louisiana? Like was there a new governor that came in or
I am not sure,
okay.
but I don't think so.
Okay.
I guess an administration is a big, broad sense. Like, I don't know
Right. Yeah. What part of the administration was
what
actually
part.
handling
Yeah.
this stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is a very, very possible reason. Another reason is they could have just like been talking out of their butts a little bit,
Oh yeah.
trying to like say they would do all this great stuff, but really just wanted the money to make displacement places because it's happening in a lot of other places across the coast of Louisiana. If you would like to learn more about this island and traditions that came along with the island, there is an award winning documentary, Can't Stop the Water, that was filmed in 2013 if you are interested in learning more.
Interesting. Yeah. I'll find a link to at least a place with information uh,
Yeah,
about the documentary. Put that down in the show notes if anybody is interested.
yeah.
But yeah. So sadly, no happy ending on this one, which is
Oh,
not
sorry,
inherently a surprise when you're talking about things regarding Native American peoples and any form of government. Um,
it's very
so
unfortunate that
yeah,
that is the norm.
but that's how we change things like that is by talking about them and raising awareness of these kinds of things.
Exactly. And I hope that people listening to the podcast learn something new today.
Yeah, and I'm sure I am 1,000% positive this will not be the first time we hear news stories about groups of people being displaced off of islands because of various climate things. Um,
Yeah.
like you said, and that number still kind of also blew my mind is that the UN estimates what 200 million people in the next
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. It's a lot. And
That
30
that is
years isn't
most of
that
the
long. That's like
population
within
of
our life.
right. Exactly.
That's within our lifetime. It's crazy.
That's that's most of the population of the United States. To borrow a phrase, that's not great. Um, so something to keep an eye on for sure. Something that we're sadly going to have to get a little more used to hearing, but
Right.
important nonetheless. So thank you so much, Fia. Next week, oh, I'll have to edit this in to the beginning of the episode because I didn't actually uh,
Yeah.
say what we're talking about next week. So if there's a
Yeah.
weird cut at the beginning of the episode, you'll know why. Um, but next week we are talking about Antarctica, the whole continent, the whole thing,
Great.
the
Love
the
it.
history, the geology, the fossils, um, and so we're going to be going over the literal coolest continent um, in great detail next week. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. And I guess
Awesome.
for this episode of Fia Takes the Wheel, I have been Gavin. That has been Fia. And we will see you all next week.
Bye.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Fenella Campanino and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.